This is Abigail from Folk Lab. Thank you everyone for being here. Thank you for our ASL interpreter team. Um, and I'm going to turn it over to Coley and Jule to facilitate the workshop for the day. Whenever you're ready to get started.
Good afternoon, and thank you so much for being here with us. My name is Coley Alston. My pronouns are they, them, theirs, and z's, them, zers. And I'm here with my colleague and friend, Jule. Jule, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, thanks, Coley. My name is Jule Arney. Pronouns are ze, them, zir, or they, them, their. And I am very excited for us to be able to talk about the history of mental health and the ways that it has been used.
Absolutely. Before we dive into our chat, a lot of what we're going to talk about is, of course, very friendly and casual, but really we want to emphasize, that we are the blueprint, marginalized people are the blueprint, and other people who have been viewed as normal are really just more common, and common does not imply normal. So I just wanted to emphasize that piece. But also before we get started, I want to make sure everyone has an opportunity to gather items for their art prompt. What I would need you to gather are any art supplies like markers, pens, whatever your preferred medium is. I want to make sure that you have the opportunity either through a sketchbook or even if you're like me and use a digital tablet, that you can take some time as we're speaking and as we're discussing to kind of draw your idealized self. And I don't mean how other people wish to view you. I really truly mean what you would look like, no constraints, imagine if we eliminated borders, you don't have to worry about nationality and things like that, but really truly think about what you would look like where you're not constrained by mostly capitalism, but also other isms in the world. Myself, for example, I'm almost always purple when I, envision my ideal self. It ranges. Sometimes I'm a pastel lilac kind of purple. Sometimes I'm a deep eggplant, but I just always think that how beautiful is that, what I could truly look like, and making sure that I'm not limiting myself. Are there any questions regarding the art prompt before we move forward with the conversation? Fantastic. Oops, oh, sorry. I saw someone in the participants. So a lot of what we really wanted to chat about is really thinking about the histories of Black and queer people in Western civilization and how a lot of those histories has been, I would say, not only hidden, but really like, softened. Even things like slavery, like how that's taught in schools, it seems like, oh, like, yeah, people were happy and they're just working. So thinking about how our histories have been twisted, how our histories have been hidden from us, and also realizing more importantly, as we think about the present and as we think about our futures, how we continuously are able to discover our truths and discover more about our past and about our ancestors, about the people who came before us. And those types of things are how we're going to embody our truths, and it's going to inform our ability to manifest in the future. In order to do this, we are going to do, of course, a little bit of a recap of history, just because it's hugely important. And it's also something that not everyone may be aware of. If you've ever read a book, you don't even have to read the specific book, but the book Lies My Teacher Told Me, that is like a 101 of almost everything that we learn in our K through 12 education, and that how it's very sanitized and it's very wrong, and also harmful. Even some certain things like I'm sure a lot of people have a similar experience of being in elementary school and we're cutting out, handprint turkeys and things like that, talking about, oh yeah, the pilgrims and the natives, they're just going to chill together and eat. And it's just like, no, that's not what happened at all. Especially thinking too, and I'm sorry for dominating it for a second, but I especially think about living in Pittsburgh and being in Pittsburgh. Fort Pitt, or what is now known as Pittsburgh, was actually one of the first documented places that settlers, colonizers gave out smallpox blankets intentionally to harm Native communities. So it is something that, again, we don't usually learn about, we don't think about, we just think, oh, the British wanted it, the French wanted it. And it's just like, it doesn't matter who wanted it because it was already someone else's land. People were already there, families were there, there was an entire culture here. and primarily Pittsburgh was used for trades with the rivers, and a lot of people were more nomadic around this area, but still just the idea that Europeans decided, you know what, I like this, I'm taking it. And that's not only what they've done with land and with people, seeing as I'm here and I'm clearly African in the Americas, but also too with our history. And when you are stealing someone's history, when you are hiding someone's past from them, it is very difficult for them to get in touch with who they are. And people tend to spend more of their lives trying to conform to what's been pressed upon them than truly finding out about their true origins and their true futures. So sorry, that was a bit much. Did you have something you wanted to add before we launch in, Jule?
Yeah, I think that's one of the bigger themes that you'll hear us talking about, especially in the history standpoint. You know, especially when it comes to queer and trans identities, a lot of those were erased all over the world, especially through colonialization. When we look at pre-colonial culture across the globe, most civilizations and cultures throughout the world on every continent had more than two genders. They had 3, 4, 5 genders. And they also had people that didn't strictly adhere or adhere at all to this concept of heterosexuality, or even our ideas of monogamous marriage. There were many different ways in which cultures decided to structure their society. And you definitely see that through, you know, the different types of gender roles. So what had worked, at least in their minds, in Western civilization and this imperialist conquering of the world, what had worked in their mind, what had separated them from whom they called savages and uncivilized folks. The thing that differentiated them was that they had such a clear delineation between man and woman, and that they only interacted in a certain way. And so when they observed these different cultures behaving in different ways, they immediately demonized that and used that as the reason as to which that they were uncivilized. But when we're looking at these cultures, there's nothing that suggests that they were uncivilized. They were simply different. And much to Coley's point, the number one thing that I think they did at least do a little bit of teaching about, especially looking at it from the European colonizers, there was a forced assimilation by these peoples. So people that did not fit into those boxes or refused to conform were very quickly erased, both in body and in spirit. And so that is where a lot of like homophobia, transphobia, and things of that nature are embedded in, because it became very apparent that these colonizers, who were very quick to use violence or other means in order to enforce their values, enforce their viewpoints, it became a situation in which a lot of people had to assimilate to survive, regardless of what their own personal feelings were. And I think that is very, very apparent. And Coley and I probably have some bias here, being the descendants of Black people who were brought here against our will. But that complete erasure of our cultures before was by design. And so it becomes really hard for us to actually know what it was. We don't know a lot about our ancestry prior to slavery, and a lot of our ancestry during slavery is also completely muddled, because we were traded around just like you would livestock. There was no true respect for family. It was more of a breeding to continue the slave trade, especially after a number of nations ceased transatlantic slave trade.
Absolutely. And just, I want to echo a few points, Jule, because like you're saying, with just the variety and diversity of gender roles, of genders, period, in other cultures, I would say too, especially I think about how children were treated. In most non-European cultures, children are highly valued. People are, judging other countries, other nations by how well are the children doing. That's usually the first thing that is asked. How are the children? Because if the kids are doing well, we are all doing well as a community. And I think that's one of the really insidious pieces about European colonization, in that they really don't value children, even their own children, just reading the histories of sending them into these coal mines, working them to death in the boilers. I can't remember, there's a term for it, and someone else in the audience, if you remember it, you can throw it in the chat. But basically, if they found children who either weren't being cared for or didn't have parents, they would ship them out, to the Midwest and, even far West to work, basically sending children into slavery too. So just this idea of not valuing children, not valuing families, thinking about even, during enslavement, the number of people, like it was considered a mental illness for you to cry, out of fear and desperation, because you literally had snatched someone's baby out of their hands, sold it to some other plantation where they'll never see their child again, and then told them, hey, you have some milk, feed my baby, even though I think you're, I don't even think you're a human being. So that level of like savagery is usually like what I think about, thinking about colonialism and thinking about how that shapes the viewing of human beings, thinking about how it shapes valuing children, and even again, how that impacts gender. And I won't dive into it too much, but even thinking about how we view our histories. A lot of times, when we're reading our history books, it's just like, oh, well, white women didn't have any power. They were just, standing by their husbands and unable to do anything. And it's like, no, when you actually really read slave narratives, you find that the women were the ones that they were so frustrated by their lack of power that they decided to turn, and whatever cruelty they could commit against people, they would. Not just there, but even during thinking about suffragettes and how like, they're like, yeah, we want to vote, but Black people aren't people. And it's just like, oh, and we want to be able to work, we want to be able to do this, and someone else is going to take care of our kids, because I'm not going to do that. I'm not taking care of these kids. I'm not going to do any of the labor that is necessary to run a household, but I want the power, I want that control. And a lot of times people don't think about that. People just think like, oh, I'm just going to focus on the person with the whips and the chains, and just like, oh no, like that, all of that was complicit in that type of colonialization, in that type of characterization of people. And I think too, just looking back to the mental illness piece, again, the cruelty to people who experience trauma, especially I'm thinking of sexual assault, how, if someone had been sexually assaulted at a young age, they would determine that they were feeble-minded and sterilize them. And I'm just, and that's not like old history. That's like, oh no, they were still doing that in the 2010s in a prison in California towards Black women. So I'm just like, oh, so things like that are not just in the past. The past doesn't just sit there and stay there. But there are a lot of other things too, I think about, just regarding that period of time. Jule and I were chatting about how you hear a part about Black Americans with enslavement, and then it's just like, okay, Abraham Lincoln says some words, everyone's free, and everyone just jumps to civil rights 100 years later. And you're like, well, what the hell happened in between that time period? And it's almost never talked about in histories, or very much like cloudy, like, oh, Black people was just existing, doing stuff. And meanwhile, it's like, oh no, just living in a sheer state of fear. So what happened right after Reconstruction is the first thing that happened. Again, people are much kinder than they really should be, because what should have happened is burn the fucking place down. But that's not what happened. What happened is, I'm going to find my family, the people you stole from me, the people you sent elsewhere, I'm going to go look for them. And that upset white people so badly. How dare these free Blacks roam the countryside? They're not working. I'm losing money. You know what? Let's criminalize this. If you're not actively working for a white person, I can put you in jail and make you work for free. And other loopholes. Again, there's so many things that we can touch on, but I won't be able to cover everything. But even thinking about that first thing that you think of is, let me find my family, not revenge, not I'm going to burn this plantation the F down, but really like think about that, trying to find your family, trying to establish that connection. And then it's like, okay, obviously you don't want us around, you don't like us. You also realize it's hell of expensive to send us back to Africa. Like, okay, you're not going to, do that. Can we just live in peace, make our own communities? Because you don't want us in your stores. You don't want to look at us. You don't want us at your restaurants and et cetera. Okay, we'll make our own communities. What happens? Bomb them, set everything on fire, lynching people, literally for trying to live on their own lives and, just not bother anyone. So I just always think that that's interesting, that people will say things like, I don't understand why Black people don't have the other things that other immigrants have, and it's like, we weren't immigrants. We were literally dragged here and then ostracized the entire time for centuries.
Yeah, and that's the biggest piece, right? Like it's not, you know, we're talking a lot about the cultural context, which is extremely important, but this was aided and abetted by the medicalization of these types of things. Very specifically, if we're looking at the psychiatric diagnosis of hysteria, for example, essentially this was just a catch-all for any man to say that this woman is not behaving in a way that I like. And so clearly, there is something wrong there, and there's something wrong with her in her brain. And that was an excuse then to lock these women up for being free-minded, essentially. And the same is absolutely true when we're looking at slaves. Drapetomania is this diagnosis they concocted specifically for runaway slaves, essentially stating why would they ever want to run away? Like, why wouldn't they want to stay and be brutalized every day? Why would they want to be able to be free to do these things that they want to do? And it is fundamentally because they were not viewed as being human. And I say that because that is exactly what they continuously tried to do, whether it was through eugenics or even through a lot of the experimentation that was done on the Black community, and in some ways continues to be done today. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the Tuskegee experiments, where they were studying the progression of syphilis, and they, as we all know today, very unethically, advised these participants that they were treating them for syphilis, but they weren't at all. And everyone turned a blind eye because they said, well, they're Black people. So, and there's also kind of this idea that Black people didn't feel as much pain or could hold more pain, but that is very much a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? We have been brutalized for centuries and survived out of necessity. And they took that as a indication that clearly these people don't feel pain in the same way that we do. And that is somehow also a part of their savagery, is that they aren't as elegant and as, I guess, sensitive to these things. But nothing could be further from the truth. This was literally a means of survival. This did not mean that we weren't hurt. What it meant was that we just had a very strong will to keep going forward.
Absolutely. And even like Joel was saying, just connecting that history to the present too, that still happens. Black people who are, go to hospital for surgery or other things, it is so difficult to receive adequate pain management. Black people are regarded as just medication seeking.
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking about a lot of people I know who have sickle cell trait. So they have crises where there's just abnormal amounts of pain in their body. And even they're told and turned away from emergency rooms and told like, oh, you're faking it. It's not really that bad. And a lot of times too, they apply this to other areas as far as this ability to just constantly suffer and constantly kind of pull through. And, we break, we're human beings, and people don't see that. People don't view Black children as children even. They view them as adults. That's why most recently, these two 16-year-old girls, when they were shot and killed, there's almost no cry about that. They're just viewed as adults who, they did something I didn't like, so they deserve to die. And people still have that mentality, that same mentality that existed during enslavement, that Black people shouldn't exist, and, hopefully they die. And actually, Hitler was really inspired by the United States. We had a huge, well, it's still going on, but we had a huge eugenicist movement.
Mm-hmm.
Again, trying to figure out who they want to eliminate from society. Black people, homosexuals, people who were considered feeble-minded. So all of these intersections you can see are people who they are seeking to eliminate. So we had something in the United States called the ultimate solution in Nazi Germany, they had the final solution, but that was inspired by the ultimate solution, which was about denying Black people education and medical care and any type of, resources and social services in the hope that, okay, the Black race will eventually die out and then we won't have to worry about it. That's actually also the main reason why we don't have universal health care, because every time it came up to vote, they're like, oh, but if we give healthcare for everyone, that includes Blacks, and we don't want that. So that's one of the reasons why we lag so far behind other industrialized countries in that regard. We hate people of color so badly, but especially Black people so much, that we would rather deny that for everyone and suffer and have ridiculous prices for things like insulin. Sorry, that was a lot.
But yeah, no, you're absolutely right, Coley. Like, these are the things that have transmogrified into things today. We are essentially dealing with more or less the same types of thoughts around race, around gender, around difference. And while we may put it under a different name, we're essentially committing the same actions. And one of my favorite types of examples of that is, I was mentioning before, it was quite normal in many cultures to have more than two genders. And in fact, this binary gender is essentially arbitrary because there is no actual binary when it comes to gender. When we're looking at genitalia, there are several people, thousands of people that have some type of mixture of presentation when it comes to their genitalia. Furthermore, there is more than just people who are born with two sex chromosomes, whether that's XX or XY. There are people born with XXY, people born with three X's, people born with four chromosomes. And all of those things can also translate into different types of anatomy. And then even when we're looking at chromosomes, for example, or excuse me, hormones. When we're thinking about hormones, a lot of times what is the commonly accepted theory is that men, as we have grouped them, are going to be testosterone predominant, whereas women are estrogen predominant. Now, what we're not saying in that is that all humans have some levels of testosterone and estrogen. And yes, if we're looking statistically, people who have chromosomes that are XX and who develop commonly, I'll say, because obviously there's environmental factors and other things that can cause changes. They will become estrogen dominant when they're in adolescence. And the reverse is true, where XY people will become testosterone dominant when they enter adolescence. This is when we start to see an actual differentiation in terms of sex in the different sexes. This doesn't at all touch on what that looks like for people who are intersex and what that type of adolescent maturation looks like. But I think what's more interesting is when we have situations where, especially with a lot of these anti-transgender bills going out, specifically things like trying to make sure that they're not able to compete in sports. This has had unintended consequences, or maybe intended consequences, especially for Black female athletes. All of the baselines that they have been setting for what is a normal range for these hormones are by and large based on data resourced from white people. So you've already biased the data because we do know that culture to culture, race to race, you're going to find different types of benchmarks. Now, you can probably still group them all together. But if you're not giving yourself the opportunity to have a representative sample, then you're already leaving out a group of people who are naturally having higher levels of testosterone. And this happens to women of all races. It's one of the main reasons why some women have some issues with fertility. It has more to do with their body just naturally producing more testosterone than is common. And that can be a way that they're able to resolve it. And the reverse is true for men. There are a number of men that have higher than common levels of estrogen. And by actually either reducing or suppressing the amount of the non-dominant hormone for that person and increasing the hormone that should be dominant for them, it can, and in many cases, resolve some of those fertility issues. So it seems really funny and petty and dumb to try so hard to delineate people in a way that we know doesn't really work. I don't think any binary truly works. Nothing is black or white, right? Everything is on some type of spectrum. And we can choose endpoints honestly anywhere, because I don't think of it as like a linear spectrum. If anything, I might think of it as something that is more circular, right? So we have arbitrarily kind of picked an endpoint because that's what's worked in our minds, that's worked in society. But there are so many different ways to end up one there, and that doesn't make you any less human. If anything, it just happens to, as Coley was saying, happens to be more common, that there are a lot of people in this area and a lot of people in this area. And that's absolutely fine. There is nothing wrong with that. The issue comes in when we erase those people that don't fall in there, because inherently what that builds is a sense for that person that they are wrong. And it doesn't matter, you know, what the actual issue is here. I know, looking at my own experience, growing up and watching the media, and looking for reflections of things that were me. It was very hard to find things from a Black perspective, which definitely I would say is easier. Even back then, it was easier. There were channels dedicated to that type of programming, and that was helpful. But when you look at the intersectional piece of that, is when it gets really difficult. It was near impossible for me to find representations of Black queer people, much less Black transgender or non-binary people, especially presented in either a kind of neutral way or a positive way. I never really saw that until recently. And those are in some select places, which is great, because that really helped me be able to see myself. All I had heard is that this is the way it is, and it's always been that way. Like, it's always been man, woman. But then I started to do some digging. I started to do some research, and I'm finding not only in Africa, but in the Americas and in Australia and in all parts of Asia, there are so many different cultures that had third and fourth and fifth genders. And in a lot of these cases, these people that were outside of that binary, outside of this man, woman category, they were actually revered members of their community. They had high status, whether it was as a shaman or a political leader or an organizer or someone who really truly supported the development of that community. And that is completely lost when we demonize those types of people and say, no, they're wrong, they're an abomination, they deserve to be killed. All of these things that are actually made manifest, right? People are attacking these people and killing them and deriding them. But even those of us who survive, we internalize those messages. And it becomes really difficult for us to ever break that cycle, to get out of this, to quote the title, this picture that they have framed us to see. Like, I have to be this, even though it doesn't fit me at all. I feel crammed inside of it. It's like putting on a latex glove that is 15 sizes too small. And my glittered nails are just trying to poke through and be fabulous, but I'm told I can't.
I think one of the most insidious pieces of this impact of history on us is, as Jule was speaking, I reminded myself and remembered, I kind of grew up with a deficit mindset, you know, this idea that, you know, Black people have to constantly prove that they're worthy of being in spaces and being in places. And, you know, just this idea that I constantly never fit in and to keep working at it, but also it's kind of like one of those things with the carrot just keeps jumping away from you. So one of those things being, like Jule was saying, not seeing myself, not seeing other people around me, and kind of being forced into a specific box. So it's just like, do this, wear dresses, do this. And it's just like, even when I would perform, it wasn't, I wasn't regarded like, okay, yeah, you did the performance. It was just not good enough, where it's the idea that people really wanted me to fit into a box of like white femininity. And that's not something that a Black body can ever achieve. But also it's like, as I grew up and as I really thought about it, it's like, is that something I even would want to achieve? Is that something I would want to be part of? And even see oftentimes too, just it just feels like a walking joke, a running joke, like just this idea of me trying to find visuals, other people who may look like me, may have similar experiences, and instead be receiving mockeries. I think of things like, what was the big thing in the 90s and early 2000s where, well, actually it's still big now, but Tyler Perry got really famous off of this too, but this idea of like Black men mocking Black women by, donning dresses and being loud and obnoxious and rude, and just kind of like embodying the same stereotypes that Black people have been forced in for decades, was really harmful. And even, again, trying to see myself and other people, it almost always was in a way that was either deficit based, like this is what you should not do, or this is bad, this is evil. I think one of my earliest memories of seeing someone who was like acting in a way that was gender nonconforming. How am I forgetting his name? I can't remember his name now, but he used to play basketball. Dennis Rodman. Dennis Rodman in a dress was one of the first instances. So I was like, okay, cool. Like, I can bleach my hair and have like lime green hair and look the way I want to. And everyone's just like, no, awful, terrible, an embarrassment. So I kind of internalized that and just was like, well, am I an anomaly? Should I even be here? All the religious texts that people are shoving at me, they show that like there's a very strict binary. And if you don't fit in that binary, you deserve to die, and not only do you deserve to die, people are going to line up to stone you to death. So I grew up in a very fearful way and just kind of envisioning like, maybe I am the issue, maybe I'm the problem, maybe I deserve to die. And that's just like a terrible way for a child to grow up. And one of the reasons why I try so hard to make sure I make space, because there are a lot of ways that children may manifest in their gender and their expression and their interests even. And the fact that these things are demonized, and, I don't want any child to ever grow up in this country and feel like maybe they shouldn't live, or even be in fear that other people might harm them because of who they are, whether that's how they, their skin color, whether it's, their body size, whether it's if they are neurodivergent, or even if they're, just different. Not everyone specifically has a label. And so thinking about that and thinking about the things that I internalized that were harmful, it's very much important to me to really uncover those histories and see like, oh no, like, baby, like what Prince said, I'm not a woman, I'm not a man, I'm something you'll never understand, in 1984. And it's just like almost a decade before I was born. So we've been here, and really that's been exciting to me. And it's something that's been thrilling in the conversations that Jule and I have had about really discovering ourselves and taking that time to sometimes even reparent ourselves, if we didn't necessarily receive the things that we wanted and we needed, and really creating that for ourselves. So that's really the movement and the things that I get excited about when I think about Black futures, when I think of queer futures, when I think of neurodivergent futures, like how it all those intersections are very valuable and very beautiful, and really emphasizing that and uplifting that, because, we are more than pain and suffering. And that's one of the things I feel like growing up, I heavily internalized that, being Black is pain and suffering. If you're born a woman or marginalized gender, you're going to live a suffering, sad life, where you're constantly in labor to other people. And it's just like, no, F that. I don't accept it. And like Jule was saying too, if we go a little further than like the history we think we know, our ancestors didn't live like this. We were loved, we were cared for, and we can bring that back and we can tap into that. So that's one of the things that I get really excited about in this space.
Yeah, it's definitely something that I have always, every time I stumble upon something new, I'm like, oh, this is so natural. I hesitate to use that word because it has been used as a dog whistle. Normal and natural have been used as a dog whistle for centuries, as a way of saying, oh, this doesn't fit the norm of white heterosexual cisgender males. Like if it does not fit the norm as they have determined it, then it is unnatural. It is not normal. And that's just not true. Like the way my hair grows is not the way that most white people's hair grows. And there's nothing wrong with that. But when you put this expectation on people to assimilate to that, and that is something that still happens today, definitely at a lesser level than it did. But I even recall as a recent high school graduate, I did an internship at an architecture firm because I was studying architecture at the time. And I had dreadlocks. And I came into work, and the person who had recommended me, they reached out to her and said to her, "Oh, you didn't tell me they had dreadlocks," because I had done all of the interviews over the phone. They said I was excellent and everything. I knew exactly what I was doing. And even the first week I was there, before they called her, they were like, "No, they're knocking it out of the park." And so my question was, then why is there so much focus on my hair? This is a way in my culture that we like to do our hair, and there is nothing about it that is inherently unneat or unclean. Like, obviously, you need to do things in order to maintain that type of hygiene or what have you. But this idea that my kinky, coily hair needs to be straight, and the things that people need to do to their hair in order to try to mimic that, it literally is putting chemicals in your hair and on your head that is stripping and can poison you over time if you leave it on your scalp too long, because it's literally burning these things that are meant to protect your hair and meant to protect your head, burning it so that you can try and fit in. And even that still isn't enough. And it costs so much money to do that, so much effort to keep up. And at least for me, and I have no judgment on any person who chooses to do whatever they want with their hair. It's popular in Black culture to say your hair is your crown, and I am a firm believer in that. And my crown today is some unicorn curls because I'm feeling it. Like, I have never been happier than being able to shake off all of the things, and it's still a work in progress, right? These things are deeply seated internally in us, especially when you think about gender. A 2-year-old, you can walk up to any 2-year-old and they will be able to tell you what are boy things and what are girl things. What do boys do? What do girls do? And so, having grown up in that, I knew there were so many things that I wanted to do, so many things that I wanted to wear, and all of these things that I knew were completely unacceptable. And that was reinforced over and over and over again. And so it took me until I was 31 to come out as genderqueer, and then to take it a step further and then be able to change my gender expression, to free myself to be able to wear a skirt if I feel like it, throw on some makeup, have long hair, have braids that are typically associated with women, wear feminine jewelry, all these things, because at the end of the day, they make me happy. The things that I do when it comes to my dress and my mannerisms and things, I do them primarily because they make me happy. And when I, again, go back and I look at some of the stories of civilizations from Western Africa, especially during that slave Atlantic trade period, like the Yoruba and other cultures, this type of, people would say I'm very colorful. And that's true, I do. I love color. I like bright colors, and I like to make sure they match in certain ways and have patterns and things. If you look at that culture and actual accounts of what these people looked like, it's exactly that. That is what they liked to do. They like to have ornamentation in their hair. They wanted loud colors. Many of you have seen traditional African garb like a dashiki and stuff. They always have really intricate patterns with bright colors and things. So is it any wonder then that I might be a bit more, inclined to also possibly like those types of things? But it was immediately rebuked by everyone around me who was trying to get me to conform in this society, and sometimes with the best of intentions. My parents did the best that they could, right? They were trying to teach me the things in order to survive in the world that they knew as they knew it, and that world is very much still there. I would say, among people my age and younger, it is changing, but it took a lot to undo all of that, to find the confidence that I completely obliterated in myself, because I would never even try when I was a little kid. As far as what I wanted to wear, I would pick the most boring, plain thing, because I knew that would be safe for someone assigned at male at birth. It'd be safe for me to wear something like that, because there wasn't anything that I wanted to wear that I would be allowed to wear. And it made me miserable.
Absolutely. I did want to say a little bit too about just like upbringing too. My parents were really, and still are really big on this idea of respectability politics, this idea that if you assimilate in such a way, it'll save you. You won't be murdered in the streets, you won't be locked up in a cage. And it's just like, respectability will not save us, whether you're regarding it, for race, for neurodivergency, it's not going to stop you. Whether you're talking about for sexuality, a lot of times people want to say, oh, well, if you just, no, I want to be free, because trying to conform is what nearly killed me. Multiple times, like Jule was saying, growing up and constantly trying to fit into this box and being told you're not doing it right. You're not doing it right. That I'm an embarrassment, that, again, an abomination came up very often. I had a nasty religious upbringing. Like I was sent to conversion camp when I was 12 here in Pittsburgh area. So just this idea of either conform or die, like those were the things that I was basically being told growing up. And even like Jule said, for a long period of my life, like I claimed it was like a goth thing, and that's not entirely untrue. Like I definitely do have a darker aesthetic, but just this idea of trying to like either, like not be seen even, like if I can't conform, if I cannot be accepted for who I am, can you at least like ignore me, not see me? And you can't, if someone in a Black body cannot be invisible, even though we're treated that way sometimes. And I hate too that even how, what is the thing? Black people are regarded as like a nuisance. It's just like, how dare you be here? You're making uncomfortable. You're either too colorful and too fabulous, or otherwise you're just the foil for, my believe fabulousness. I think about a lot of diagnoses too for like mental illnesses, and how they're not based on what could be supportive to you, what can be helpful to you. They're based in, oh, you're so inconvenient to the people around you, we're going to give you something. And it's just like, that's so fucked up. And it's so wrong. And we really do deserve to have a variety of supports and a variety of ways to exist and be in this world. So that's, again, one of the things that we kind of gravitate towards in the work that we do, but also just in supporting this next generation. I'm so proud of Gen Z and Gen A, and the things that they're rejecting. They're like, no, we're not going to conform. No, I'm going to tell you who I am. I'm not going to let you put me into a box. I'm not going to let you foist an identity upon me. I'm going to tell you exactly who the hell I am. And I love that about them. And I absolutely say, yes, we need to protect these babies. We need to uplift them. Yes. Like so in the comments. Yes, exactly. With ADHD, I been trying to get a diagnosis for a while, and they're like, you're not inconvenient enough to other people. It's just you. And you're like, you're functioning. I'm like, so that's not, okay. All right. Fuck me then. But I think a lot also about, just finding community too, especially. That's one of the things that Jule and I were really just jazzed about. And I also came out like, I don't even say that later, but it wasn't until I was in my 20s, because I didn't have language for, how I am, how my gender manifests. I just was just like, wrong. Growing up, again, that deficit based, your gender is wrong because it's not the gender that I assigned to you and you're not fitting. But really, like, no, I'm not binary. And my specific gender is Maverick, but still just the idea of like, oh, there are a whole bunch of other people like me. Like I may not be common, but like definitely in the grand scheme of things, absolutely normal, absolutely natural. And, and finding community, whether it's online, whether it's, just moving out of the spaces that I was in, is really exciting for me. And it's something that I especially want to help other people with, finding your people, and developing chosen families is just a very beautiful journey that I've gotten to share with people and helping to inspire people too, because that idea for the longest time, for the first 18 years of my life, I truly believe like I am absolutely alone. Out of all these billions of people, there is no one like me. And I've been constantly fed that message. It's like, it's bullshit. Of course, I didn't know it at the time, but there's 7 billion of us. We cannot fit into these binaries. Like Jule said, there's no way in hell any category you want to say that you fit into this or that for all of us, for all of humanity. So again, just really excited to think about that. And I do want to ask Jule, like, can you tell us a little bit more about how you found community?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I guess I'll just come on out with me being old. So I'm not that old, but I'm 33. And in middle school, we had the dial-up internet. For those of you old enough, you know the trials and tribulations of that and the noises that come with it. But the way that I was able to initially find some community, because everyone around me, my immediate family, my extended family, my schools, my peers, everyone around me, there was no one, not a single person that openly identified as queer or trans, or there were actually a few Black people at the point where I was living in Indiana at that time. So there were a couple of layers to this sense of loneliness. Enter Yahoo group chat in its infancy, this kind of proto-social media space, where I'm sure most of us who were on there were younger than we were supposed to be. I would always add 2 years on when someone would ask me ASL, age, sex, location, if you're unfamiliar. And that is the first place that I was able to find other people who specifically identified as like lesbian, gay, or bi. Not so much trans, but definitely lots of people who are lesbian, gay, or bi. And that really helped me a lot to be able to see that there were so many people who were having the same types of struggles and also, feeling that sense of loneliness. But it wasn't, while we could connect on that loneliness, it wasn't something we dwelled on, right? It was hopeful largely in those chat rooms for us to be like, it's so good that I'm able to talk to someone who gets it, who also understands how lonely it feels, and the fact that we can, yes, take a moment to talk about those things, but then talk about what we want in our future. The fact that we're able to see all of these people in these spaces, and around that same time is when we're starting to get a few more neutral to positive representation of gay people, all white, on the television, whether it's Ellen or Queer Eye for the Straight Guy or Will and Grace, all white. That helped because at least had some representation. It was some acknowledgement. But it definitely left me going, okay, so is this only something that white people can do? Because there's lots of things I've been told that only white people can do. And that doesn't really help me in this situation. And so I think part of the reason why I was able to really come to fuller terms, especially when it comes to identifying as genderqueer, non-binary, has been a lot of the more recent media that has a lot more depth to queer people, not only in the race spectrum, but in the different types of personalities and the kind of the realness of these different representations. Like Black people aren't a monolith, queer people aren't a monolith, no group of people is a monolith. We are, people like to say, oh, you're a little snowflake. And my thought is, okay, So are you telling me that a random frozen drop of water that we know for a fact each are individual, that is more complex than every human being on this planet? I can't buy that. Like if we can acknowledge the fact that frozen H2O can be that complex and we are made up of so many more things, could we not be equally as more complex, to make room for that? And I understand like the ease that comes with being able to categorize people, but that's a false sense of security. And at worst, it becomes dangerous. And so it was, for me, it was people like Billy Porter, shows like Pose, people like Todrick Hall on YouTube, Laverne Cox, very specifically being able to see Daryl Stevens, being able to see Black queer people in various types of queerness, all in these very interesting roles, and moreover, them as individual people outside of their performance career, just being true role models, people I could look up to, people who, like me, who tends to be very outspoken, were very outspoken, but also knew how to do it in a way that was all based in logic and was also reaching, right? Like I'm never going to allow someone to just completely disrespect me, but I am also going to take a step back and allow for there to be some human error. Because at the end of the day, if my goal is to create a more harmonious and more open world, then there are going to have to be some conversations that are uncomfortable. There are going to be moments that people may say something where they didn't actually intend harm, but maybe there was some harm done. And to allow some grace there. We've all made mistakes. And I think it's, not to over harp on intentionality, because I think this can also be misinterpreted. It does matter to me whether or not I've been intentionally harmed. However, whether or not you did it intentionally does not change the fact that harm was done. And that is something that some people miss if they feel that, oh, well, I didn't do it intentionally, so I'm like, okay, but you could still like make an apology, acknowledge the harm that you did. Like to just sweep it under the rug under, well, I didn't mean to do it, so that's insulting. And to me, kind of sends a signal that you have no intention of actually trying to redress that, trying to build a truer sense of communication amongst ourselves. There was somewhere I was going with that, but I lost it.
It's okay. I wanted to jump in for a few things too. I just wanted to really emphasize a couple things. One, that this is all manufactured. All of these isms, sexism, racism, ableism, all of those things are manufactured. They're intentionally created in our systems, in our society. So it's not a matter of, oh, okay, things will get better over time, because that's some shit I hate. This idea that like things do not get better just because time passes. Things get better because we make it better. So being intentional about who we are. And like Jule was saying too, not just, oh, I disrespected you in the past, or, oh, hey, like my ancestors stole this land. Like, no, make restitution. Don't acknowledge it and just leave it there. I need you to make this right. And that's where a lot of people, they kind of shy away, like, oh yeah, like this idea of justice, but I don't want to be inconvenienced. Can we like, no, we can't work that out at all, and it's absolutely, these chickens are coming home to roost. We are going to get what is owed to us, all of us, all of the harms that have been levied against us. And also too, I did want to speak a little bit of the exhaustion I spent, again, from that deficit mindset growing up, and just this idea of having to be exceptional, having to be exemplary. I also spent a lot of my life, at least 2 decades of my life, constantly trying to prove people wrong, constantly trying to like, okay, well, this is, and it's just like, no, I'm not wasting my breath. I'm not wasting my energy. That is labor that is demanded of me, probably rooted in sexism and capitalism, but just this idea of like, no, I'm not doing additional labor and additional work when you still owe me. You still owe my people. Again, whether you're talking about Indigenous communities, Black communities, you know, differently abled communities. So really emphasizing that piece that we need action. I don't just want your words. And also too, that we deserve it. You know, we are worth it.
If I could,
yeah, come in.
yeah, if I could just jump in on that, like that was something I was thinking about right before we hopped on. I had given a presentation earlier this week for work, and you know, this very much had the same types of things, right? Like especially coming from a Black middle class family, there is pressure because if you are being put in situations where most Black people aren't, you are definitively under a microscope. And so there is this pressure to be perfect, to excel at everything, knowing full well that you will not get the credit you deserve. They'll, in a lot of ways, try to dismantle any type of pride you feel. And that is often what happened to me. I did very well in high school and did very different things. But the thing I always expected in response from a lot, not all, a lot of my teachers and administrators and other adults that weren't from my community was for them to try to take that victory away from me, right? So I got into Carnegie Mellon and I went there. And the common thing that I would hear is, oh, you just got in there because of affirmative action. Like, okay.
Nothing you work for is your win.
Like, I didn't work for it at all. Like they just saw Black on the application. They're like, let them in. Like that. First of all, that's not even how affirmative action works.
No.
To begin with, but also like constantly hearing that message, whether it was there, whether it was at a job, and honestly kicking butt in something, and watching a coworker who was a good friend of mine also kick butt in a very similar way. And the way that they rewarded her, both in you know, verbal feedback as well as in promotion and compensation, was radically different from what I was told for doing a very similar job, which was you did okay, you could do better, this, that, and the other, because there's like this hidden rubric where even though I met all the things you asked for, because that would also be on my performance review, it would say, oh yeah, you met expectations and exceeded, but we're not giving you a raise and you're not up for promotion. Where does that make sense at all? Why is it that I need to prove myself even more? Like, I am not asking you to not give this person their due because they earned it. But I did the same thing and you're telling me it's not good enough. What are these expectations? And that too seeds in my brain. So now when I'm doing this type of work, for example, and I was doing a training and I was getting feedback for it and it was overwhelmingly positive, I didn't know how to receive that because I'm not used to it. I'm used to it needing to defend and be like, no, I know I did well. I need to stand up for myself and say to you, no, I know I did well. I knocked it out of the park and you need to see that. And to actually get what I did need in that situation, it was hard for me to believe it. Even though at my core, I was like, yeah, no, I did do a good job. It still was like, no, I'm being set up somehow. And that's part of how all of this really fucks with your brain, which is why it's not great for your mental health, right?
Yeah, constantly having to prove yourself and constantly doubting yourself, but also especially that piece about when you are, you know, really admired for your work that you're doing, it doesn't feel good. It feels scary. It feels like either I'm doing such a good job that you're going to give me more labor to do and not compensate me, or it feels like I'm doing well, but you know, like at any moment, if you are at the least bit disgruntled with me, I lose everything and you snatch it back. So I can't even enjoy things like that. You know, whether we're talking about performance reviews, whether it's even like a compliment, like, oh, Coley, you look nice. I'm like, nice for what? Because usually there's a but, like, oh, you look nice for a blue. But yes, absolutely. As we are starting to wrap up to get ready for Q&A, I just wanted to touch on the art prompt too, in case you all were like enamored and forgot to start drawing. I did want to mention too, one of the things that Jule and I were chatting about as we were envisioning the art project was really, again, thinking about where we can see ourselves. One of the things I've really loved recently, and like this more in the past 10 years than anything else, but being able to customize yourself in a video game. Like the first time I was able to get a Pokemon game and I can make myself brown and like give myself like it like a hairstyle like I would actually wear, I really felt seen. I'm like, I can see myself in this world in ways that I can't see myself sometimes in this lived experience too. So, you know, whether you use Pokemon, whether you use World of Warcraft, because we talked about that a lot too, where, you know, pretend this is the RPG of life. Yes, we know the graphics suck and the original skins sometimes are a little bit lacking, and also the leveling. Ugh. Too long. But I did want to suggest too that as we're talking about building community, as we're talking about like looking at ourselves, our true selves, not forgetting too that our blood relations are just your suggested pre-party. So literally you can find, you know, whether it's romantic partners, platonic friends, you know, you can literally build your entire community around you. And it is possible, because I know that is one of the things I feared most upon coming out, this idea that I don't know any trans people who can come out and still have their families. I don't know any trans people who can come out and still be loved. So just that idea too, like bring it forward in your art, bring it forward in your life. And yeah, any more questions, comments from you too, Jule?
No, I think you wrapped it up well.
Okay. You had a beautiful character you chatted about before. That's what I was like, did you want to share or not necessarily?
Oh, yeah.
I think it's helpful for the visual.
So like there's a couple of games that I've done. Like I love Animal Crossing. I love that they have started to add some more Black Afrocentric hairstyles. I will say, I'm like, oh, is that it? But please do not misread into that, because they are killing it compared to literally every other game. And I am so glad that they took that step, and hopefully that is something that will encourage other video games to, again, give even more options, because a lot of times it is very like straight hair centric. It doesn't think about curly, coily hair, and then it makes it a little bit harder for you to represent yourself in a way, if that is the way you want to represent yourself in that way, because again, there's no requirements here. However you want to represent yourself. Honestly, I always say that my spirit animal is the Galarian Rapidash, and
oh yes,
I am very much repping that look right now. So, you know, I just do love that freedom. And I think one of the things that was really great for me was playing D&D Neverwinter, because I am secretly an elf. And in there, you can really customize, you know, skin tones, eye color, different types of outfits. And it's kind of in this medieval period. And what I really liked about it was that I could really immerse myself into this kind of magical fantasy. Like, what if I were unlimited, right? Because there are so many moments in my life that I unfortunately can feel a bit limited, whether that is, especially when it comes to my gender expression, right? Like if I'm just going out in the middle of the country, because I tend to like to wear skirts, but it's a thought process I need to have, because, you know, the number of trans women that are being killed is an epidemic, and that has not slowed down. And even though I'm not a trans woman, being someone who is Black trans femme is good enough. And that is terrifying, right? The fact that I have to kind of pause a bit and think about, oh, maybe I can't be my authentic self because people might literally harm me, is something that's really real and visceral, and has thankfully never come to physical things. I've got friends who are much bigger than me who will step in, But that has happened a number of times in my life. And that's part of the reason why it is so hard for people to come out, even as we were talking about at the very beginning. Um, Throughout this colonialization, they made it so that anyone that did not fit this mold would either you are forced to assimilate or you die. And that still plays out today.
Yes. So I think I want to make sure we have enough time to do a little bit of Q&A and really like honor that. So if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat. I do want to let you know though, we are recording. So if you don't wish to be recorded, please let us know in the chat before you unmute yourself. And also, if you don't have a specific question on the workshop, you can also share too a description of what your idolized self looks like, because I'm really curious to hear about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's also, while we're allowing people some time to post a question, there is Black Fae Day happening right now on social media. Get into it. I'm still finishing my look, but it's going to be glorious. I see one here from Aaron. I can read it. When searching for community, what helped you get over the initial anxiety of reaching out to folk? Coley, do you want to start?
It feels like disingenuous because similar to Jule, I first started like exploring my community through the internet, and it probably was not like the safest place, but that was where I was at. So I was usually lying about my age. So a lot of times I ended up just kind of encumbered by other problems that normal, like not normal, but typically 12-year-olds aren't concerned about. So I was like, oh, this is a lot. So I feel like that was one of the first ways I started looking for a community. I think being very intentional about who I am, like if you know me outside of the space, you know, I have a lot of opinions. So really just being loud and consistent about that, you know, like especially in my values regarding, you know, people being able to exist and having autonomy over who they are and how they exist. And especially on things that like are controversial, like abortion, like people should not have to carry babies that they don't want to carry. Or even, what's the word? Euthanasia. If you're in so much physical pain that you wish to depart from this plane, you should be assisted in that. And that should be okay, instead of it being like very scary, very bad. Well, honestly, I can go as far as I want to. I was going to say, honestly, if you don't want to be here and it's not even that you're in a lot of pain or, you know, there's a medical reason, I don't think people should have to be forced to be here, especially if you are not doing the work to make it a safe place for them to exist. So being very intentional about who I am, help those people gravitate towards me. And the people who are like, no, women aren't people, and I don't think there are more than two genders, like they just fuck off, basically, for lack of better terms.
Yeah, I definitely echo that sentiment. I think it can be very hard to find a pocket, especially depending on where you are, right? Because not every, like, for example, if you happen to be in a rural area and you are looking specifically for Black queer people, again, bias here. But like, I imagine like being in a rural area of Montana, looking for Black queer people is going to be a bit tough. That being said, I do know that for me, I personally much prefer to try and meet people in person, but well, thanks COVID. But I think, yes, the internet is a great place to start. If nothing else, it may be a good way for you to find some type of organization that can enable you to meet people. So like in Pittsburgh, we have a bunch of different like sports leagues that are queer specific. There's lots of art things that are queer specific. There's lots of things that are Black and queer specific. So being able to kind of find out those types of events with the type of people that you are interested in trying to develop connections with is definitely a good way, especially if there's like a more kind of low-key social event, whether it's going to an art gallery, or just like having a picnic, you know, something where there's not a lot of pressure on you or on the other people, and kind of allows you to just organically be able to seek out some of the people that you kind of vibe with. Definitely also helpful to just, if you have been able to find at least one person that is someone you think is kind of a part of those circles that you're trying to gravitate to, talk to them, see if they also are having that interest, because I know that it makes it a ton much easier whenever you have like another person going with you, to kind of help break that ice. And I hope that helps.
Absolutely. I will say one more motion about that before I go on to the next question. I will say too, it's been helpful for me, especially to find other people who maybe not be similar as far as like direct lived experience. I'm not saying find me another Black non-binary 30-year-old in Pittsburgh, but really thinking about other people whose liberation is bound up in mine. So it may not be the exact same thing, but it's just like, hey, you know, it's really fucked up that people are locked up in prisons or locked up in mental institutions. And I'm going to stand with those people. That may not be my personal experience, but I'd be damn sure I'm not going to sit around and watch that happen to other people and not say anything and not do something. And even going to those events, going to the protests, really showing up for other people has just brought a lot of like wealth into my life in the form of human beings and their, you know, their values and their skills. And again, that diversity of lived experiences.
Yeah,
but yes,
Black Lives Matter protests were definitely, at least the ones that I went to in Pittsburgh, were very intersectional. And so it really provided an opportunity to connect with people of all kinds of backgrounds all around that cause.
Yes. I don't know if this is a question or more of a statement, but I will definitely like just, I do agree with you with that. And especially I feel I have an eating disorder, so it's hard for me to comment on too, but like just this idea too, that even if you do hit something that you would call like your ideal weight, or if you know, are moving towards your ideal self, people don't ask you about what it took to get there. They're just like, oh, nice. You know, you're finally conforming to the way that I wanted to see you as. And it's not a matter of what did you lose to get to this point. So I do feel like it can be very scary, especially when it's medically related. You know, the times that I was super skinny, like maybe 104 pounds on my current frame, I looked horrible, but people were like, oh, but you're skinny, so that's good. And it's just like, my body is literally shutting down and you're applauding this because it fits the beauty ideals that you're foisting upon me, but you don't really see me. So it definitely does contribute to that feeling of despair and invisibility, but also too, I can see how, and you know, just seeing how other people are treated with different body types that, you know, like, can I even complain? And it's like, absolutely. Like you can definitely feel something and be harmed by it, and it doesn't negate somebody else's pain.
Mm-hmm.
Just as a follow-up question, hearing you both talk about how you connected with other folks, I'm thinking about like the internet and how much that is to put on a kid. And I think, Coley, you also said that of like, oh, this is a lot. And so I'm wondering about, given that like there's a lot more going on the internet now, but also just like where folks are in their families, how do you have conversations with kids about self-expression in a way that's inviting so that they feel like seen and heard?
This is good.
Mm-hmm.
Did you want to go first, Jule?
Sure. So I think the way to go about that, it starts with providing a safe and open space, right? So a lot of what we were talking about before was all about how there were people, society, the unfaced man that was putting all of these expectations and requirements upon us. And that is what led to kind of this shutdown of not being able to actually be who you are. Because if you look at very young children, they are nothing but themselves. Like unfiltered, like they tend to be very whatever it is that they are. And it is a necessary part of life to socialize, but it doesn't need to be in a way that is overtly damaging to them, right? Because at the end of the day, whenever we're socializing with someone, we are always making some type of compromise. And it doesn't need to be something, though, that compromises you as a being. When I say compromise, it may be, I am usually talking at volume 10, and I know this person can't really handle that much loudness. So I just bring it down just a little bit, but I'm not doing something that would overtly change who I am or make me feel like I'm having to fully hold back who I am. So I would want to take that same similar type of approach with a child. If you give the child the room to just fully explore, because in my mind, that's what a child's job is, right? A child in adolescence is just figuring out who the fuck you are, because, well, you need to, because come 18, you're an adult now and good luck. And if we can allow children to actually use that time to figure out who they are then, instead of what has been the experience for a lot of people my age and even some kids still today, that they were instead pushing down all of these things that were them. And then now, if they have an ability and the will and the desire, you need all of those. If they're able to gather those all together, then they can start to sort through everything that it is in their life and say, okay, is that really me? Or is that just because I was told I need to do that? And try and uncover other parts that they may have buried in the past. And that takes a lot of time and self-reflection to do. Instead, if we let children have that space, and instead of overtly saying, no, don't do that, or what have you, instead do a gentle nudge, a guide, because children don't always make the best decisions. And, you know, sometimes they're really selfish, right? And that's not really a desirable trait. So instead of treating them like something that does not have any amount of autonomy, because they do, we just treat them like they don't. Why don't we engage them in a way that we would engage an adult at their level, right? Talk to them about why, I mean, hey, maybe that's not the look that you're going for, but maybe it is. Give them the space to be able to fully explore rather than telling them it needs to be this way. Because I know, at least for me, anytime someone told me that it is just this way and I had questions about it and they just refused to answer it, I had serious problems with that. And it turns out every time I did, I was right. Things like manifest destiny. When they were teaching that to me in school, I was like, okay, I don't understand what this concept is. It doesn't really make sense to me. Why do we keep saying it? And why are you asking me to write 3 sentences about it? Because I don't get it. Like, what is this manifest destiny? What is it supposed to mean? They're like, oh, well, you know, we took all of it. I'm like, took it from who? And there was silence. They're like, just write the thing. And I'm like, but I have concerns. If you encourage them to critically think, which I think is something that unfortunately can be very lacking in our current society, mostly because we haven't truly invested in our educational system to make sure that everyone in our population can have that ability to take different pieces of information and determine for themselves based on all of that information from credible sources, because that's part of the critical thinking, right? Like, you don't just take information from anybody. You take it from people that you respect, people that have expertise in that area. They are more than likely going to make a choice that is socially advantageous to them, but also isn't something where they're completely compromising themselves and getting rid of who it is that they are. It provides that safe space for them to grow and explore on their own.
I will say too, this is one of the joys that I get to have. I get the pleasure of serving young LGBTQ youth and in various capacities that I've had especially when I used to work in drop-in centers, especially to see youth who knew in that space that they are safe and that they can, express themselves in whatever way. And to see the sadness, when they either wiped off their makeup or they changed their clothes in their gym bag and had to go back home. Like those are the very heartbreaking experiences that I see. And one of the things in those situations, in that capacity, just showing up for young people and, being visible. Just this idea of like, I go out into the world and like to some I may look silly, but to young people, I can look like that. I can grow up and potentially be like that person, or, like it's okay to be colorful when I'm grown, or, wear suits and ties or skirts and whatever. I will say though, on a more connective level, I don't work in a drop-in center currently. I actually work with families directly. And that's actually some of the big work that we do. Myself and Jule, we actually work with families who are struggling to accept their LGBTQ young people in their lives. And really like working with those families and working with the parents and caregivers, especially outside of the earshot of children, because the kids don't need to hear the parents, try to figure themselves out. And also making it very important to children when I get to meet with them, that they are in control of their information. All your confidentiality is yours. So if you use a name and you only want me to share that name and talk to me using that is fine. Your pronouns, absolutely. All of those pieces are hugely important to me. I do sometimes toe the line legally, as far as making sure that youth remember that they have access to certain things, especially at the age of 14 in the state of Pennsylvania. You can receive mental health care without permission of your parents. You can receive healthcare, but especially sexual health care. So if they need to go be seen, or if they're concerned about something, I make sure I give them all the resources necessary for them to be able to do that. Because it's hugely important to me, and it's hugely important, again, like Jule was saying, respecting them as human beings. They're not like tiny and incompetent. Like, no, like they know what's going on, and they may not have the power necessarily to live the way that they wish to, or show up and, and be accepted. But that doesn't mean that we just stop and tell them to conform. That means that we support them and let them know like, hey, it could be difficult for a while, but it is definitely worth it in the end. And I'm going to be here and I'm going to advocate for you. So all of those things, absolutely, it varies. Again, like Jule was saying, it's very different for me if it's like, okay, I have the opportunity to help guide the caregivers or the parents, or even help potentially help parent this child, versus like, this is a child I may see in the community and I may not have that knowledge, and I may not be able to be part of their lives in an ongoing way just because of like your capacity and your adult role. But making sure that we show up for people in whatever way we can, but especially children, especially showing children that they are important, that they are valued, and that, again, that their information is sacred. I think that a lot of kids, I know historically, I did grow up in this way, and Jule, I'm going to guess you might have grown up in a similar way, that children, none of your information is yours, whether it's about your grades, whether it's about your behavior. I'm going to tell every single person, and you don't have any privacy. And I think that is so messed up. And I make it a mission personally to eliminate that bull, because it is important for kids to know that your information is protected, you are safe, and there are no secrets. Like, like there is no reason why you have to hold secrets. If there aren't adults that you feel comfortable talking to, I will help you find them. If I'm not your adult, that's okay. I just want you to know there are people who care about you. And, we really want to make sure that you're able to be safe and able to make the best decisions possible.
Honestly, it's one of the reasons why I do push through and do what I want, because I always think to myself, if I had seen someone like me walking down the street, that would have been eye-opening.
Absolutely. Sorry, I was reading the question from Mel. Did you get a chance to look at it?
Could one of you read it out loud for the interpreters, please?
Oh, absolutely. The whole thing?
Whatever part of it you want to respond to. Thank you.
I'm gonna read a shortened version of it. Can you speak more about navigating the uncertainty or anxiety that comes from being your ideal self in an unideal world, and what strategies you've used? I hope this makes sense. Thank you. Absolutely, it does make sense. Like, so many things go through my mind, but especially like, I think especially like being Black is one of the first things I think of. It's just that even when people want me here, they don't want me here. So like just constantly dealing with that, just that expectation, like Jule was saying, that sometimes when I meet people over the phone, or they've only heard my voice and they're like, oh yes, Coley, I can't wait to meet you. And then they see me, they're like, oh, a Black. Like they don't say it out loud, but that's the face that I'm reading. Or even how certain people say the word Black, like black, like you could tell like, oh goodness, they're going to put some raisins in this potato salad and try to murder me. But as far as the disability piece, I don't want to take up too much space on it, you know, me personally, but I will say I'm currently disabled. And I thought it adds something completely different to my identity and who I am, as far as like, I feel like an inconvenience to people. I feel like a burden. I don't even want to ask people to hang out with me because I have to worry about, you know, what if I have to use the restroom? Is it going to be accessible? If there are steps, I won't be able to climb unless I crawl, like things like that. So like just this idea of like, I am not a burden. I know this, and having to constantly basically unfuck my brain because my brain is telling me like all these terrible things. And a lot of that's internalized. So I will say that too. Like I know a lot of your question was more externalized, like how people might view you, but my internal world is so turbulent that it usually is the thing that is interfering with how I'm seeing myself. But definitely like how other people see me, I've had to give up on it, honestly. Like I know I'm magical. I know I'm divine. And if other people can't see that, I don't want them around me. So really kind of, it can be bad in that I withdraw a lot from people, but I really can't stand to be in spaces where I'm not truly valued and truly loved and people really want to be around me. I can't be around fake people. And I don't mean that in like the goofy catty way from high school, but just this idea of like, it really drains my energy. So thinking about that and thinking about even the ways that I show love to my friends, how they show love to me, you know, whether you're into love languages, but honestly, like I want all of them, you know, I want gifts, I want kind words, I want to spend time with you. And really that's been what's been most effective as far as kind of living in this world where I know people don't want to see a queer, Black, disabled person whose brain tells them weird things.
Yeah, like I think the external piece, like the thing that is most often in the front of my mind is because I've been traveling and stuff. Bathrooms. As someone who is often wearing a skirt with some pretty curly hair, some girly hair, but then I have this goatee, which even when I'm wearing my mask as I'm like out in public, my height kind of gives away things. And it doesn't matter which bathroom I pick, male or female, I'm getting stared at the entire time I'm in there. And it's very uncomfortable because literally I'm just trying to use the bathroom. And I really wish people would stop staring at me in that way. You know, these aren't, oh, no, these are, what are you doing here? Like why does it need to be like that? Like what are the things that you're thinking about? And definitely talking about what you're saying, Coley, I've definitely had lots of times where people have asked for a Black voice in the room, but then they want a tone police. Yeah. They want to eschew the things. I'm like, you literally just asked me for my opinion and I gave it to you. And because you were really looking for a confirmation, which I didn't give you, you now just want to throw it out, which I'm like, okay, well then why am I here? Because that is a complete waste of my time. Like, I definitely want to echo what you were saying, Coley. Like, I have no time for the foolishness. I always like to tell people graduate level courses only. I'm not teaching no intros, no surveys. Like, I need you to be able to at least be able to see the world around you, understand that there are going to be people that are different from you, and also understand that that doesn't really have a direct impact on you, right? Because so many people want to make it about themselves and make assumptions as to how my behavior, my dress, the way I talk, the way I carry myself, somehow that affects their life. And it's always in a negative way, right? And I'm like, how is that even possible? I just walked past you down the street. I don't understand why this is even a conversation piece. But I think I guess the way to phrase it is, if you continue to allow to have people like that in your life, you have no room at all to take people into your life that may actually add a benefit. So yeah, it can definitely, especially again in pandemic times and depending on what your social circle even looks like right now. It can be very terrifying, the idea of just cutting someone loose. But at the end of the day, even if you don't replace that person, aren't you dropping a burden? So that is a net positive. Be happy, boo.
Yes. Be happy and be unlimited by your histories, and find your true histories too. You know, as we've been diving deeply into our identities and who we are, again, it's just really nourished us. So I hope that you're able to drink into that and really appreciate that. And we appreciate your time and you spending this Saturday afternoon with us. I did ask in the comments if you could tag Folk Lab with your illustrations. If you're a little shy or if you still want to take some time on it, that would be lovely to see on social media.
And I just, sorry, go ahead, Jule.
I was going to say, also feel free to reach out to me on the socials. Always glad to follow up with any of you, especially if you had any questions or just want to talk more about certain things. I'm sure Coley is also open to that, but
yes,
feel free.
Amazing. Thank you both so much. And thank you on behalf of Folk Lab. Thank you to Insider Minds. Thank you to our interpreters team. Thank you to the Pittsburgh Foundation and the Opportunity Fund for the funds that made this whole month possible. And I hope we'll see some of you at our future workshops. And I'm going to touch base with Coley and Jule and see if there's anything that they want to send you all, contact information, and that book recommendation if you want, Jule. And we can send it to everybody who attended in a follow-up email.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.